the rules. But he is saying I can't apply rules in a blanket sort of way to what are very different kinds of situations around the world. So we know, for example, that the traditional Catholic teaching is that marriage is between a man and a woman. The Pope repeats that. He repeats that gay unions cannot be the equivalent of marriage. At the same time, he calls upon his pastors in the face of families that are in what they call irregular situations, which generally they mean divorced and remarried or couples living together, or any sort of family situation that comes to the pastor that wants to participate in the life of the church. Pope Francis says the first point must be to accept the people where they are and to bring them into the fullness of the church eventually. So this is the real key point. We don't have a major change in doctrine, but we do have a change in the way this doctrine should be emphasized at the grassroots level, Robin.
And I think that's the key. It's not a top-down diktat here. He's very keen to say this is about pastoral care. And the fact that it's woolly, the fact that it's grey is exactly his point. He says life is not black and white.
Exactly. He doesn't shy away from what others might call ambiguity. He does put a lot of responsibility onto his local priests. And for example, one of the hot button issues was about the question of communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. And there is a fairly straightforward rule that if you're divorced and remarried, you cannot receive communion. The Pope didn't come down and say yes or no on that issue, even though the bishops had debated it quite hotly. Instead, he says that needs to be looked at an individual level with the consciences of the individuals involved. There are lots of reasons for divorces, and maybe there are mitigating circumstances that would allow the couple to fully participate in the Catholic Church. Robin?
Delia Gallagher there in Rome, thanks so much. So as Delia was saying, a lot more responsibility in the hands of Catholic priests. I want to bring in our CNN religion commentator, Father Edward Beck, live from New York. Hi there, Father. How does this affect how a priest ministers to his flock?
Well, it affects it a lot because it reminds us that we're called to be shepherds of mercy. We're supposed to help people form conscience, the Pope says. We're not supposed to be their conscience. We're not supposed to be laying laws on it to make it more difficult for them, but how can they be more included in the Catholic community? So in a sense, the law may not have changed, but a lot of people, even practicing Catholics, didn't realize that this was the law, that one's individual conscience, by the way, Vatican II said this, is the highest moral barometer for somebody, so that somebody can come to a decision in themselves that might be contrary or not fully in accord with Catholic teaching, but if their individual conscience leads them there, then they have to follow their individual conscience. That is church teaching. And Pope Francis is reminding us that priests and bishops have the responsibility to help people reach that informed conscience to make those kind of decisions.
And that's what is many Catholics around the world will be receiving this news with a great deal of hope and grace, as the Pope wanted them to. But isn't there also going to be a huge problem on how this is rolled out? Isn't there going to be huge inconsistencies in the way priests in different parts of the world will interpret this tone, this new tone?
That may be true, Robin, but I think what's great is that the Pope has this document for all of the faithful. So he's saying, yes, bishops and priests, you are required to stand by this and minister this. But the faithful, you have to know that this is your right. This is your duty as a practicing Catholic or as somebody who may feel outside of the church and wanting to be more included. So you know this now, and that you have the responsibility, therefore, to doing what you need to do in your life to make sure you are more included. So yes, I suppose it can be, in certain dioceses, administered differently, but really we're hearing from central government here, the Pope himself, that this is what he wants the worldwide church to do. He says there are cultural differences, there are language differences.
Well, let's talk about the cultural differences, because I you know, when you talk about central government here, say the Pope saying, listen, this is a change in tone, but when you talk about government, and some governments, you know, have in law written, their perspective on contraception or homosexuality or on divorcees remarrying in many Latin American countries or in Africa. This is going to perhaps be a tug between the church and legislation sometimes.
It certainly will be, and I think the Pope would intend that is why we have the separation of church and state, because if there are situations of injustice in the law, the Pope says that the church needs to stand on the side of people, on the side of mercy, on the side of inclusion, on the side of understanding. So in fact, this will help people in those situations to be able to have a church that supports them against certain laws that may be discriminatory. The Pope says in here with gay people, there is no reason in any fashion for discrimination. They must be fully included into the life of the church. Now, you may not agree with same-sex marriage, and the Pope does not. But he says just because somebody doesn't reach the fullness of what the church teaches doesn't mean they are excluded or excommunicated. Get them into the tent, into the fold, and allow that process to develop as part of the faith community. So it's really a message of inclusion, of mercy, of forgiveness, of come join us and be on the way with us.
And we can't overstate enough just how important and how much this means to millions and millions of people around the world. And I think that is what is so key about this. This is a broad, sweeping shift in the tone of the Catholic Church, which will be very well received in many parts of the world. Father Beck, thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin.
Well, Britain's Labour Party